We've all had those weeks where one workout is full of personal records and the next feels like we're lifting through quicksand. It's tempting to blame sore muscles or poor nutrition, but often the real culprit is hidden in our nervous system. On days when I feel unstoppable, my brain and spinal cord are sending powerful signals to my muscles. When I feel weak and sluggish, it might not be muscle fatigue at all. It could be that my central nervous system is taxed. In this talk, I'll explore the difference between muscle fatigue and CNS fatigue, explain how neural drive powers strength, and discuss how stimulants and recovery influence your ability to perform. Let's begin by defining what central nervous system fatigue actually is. Central nervous system fatigue refers to a drop in the nervous system's ability to drive your muscles. It's not permanent damage, but a temporary reduction in neural output that makes it harder to recruit motor units and generate force. After a series of heavy lifts or a stressful day, the neurons in my brain and spinal cord can't fire at the same high rates, and this limits the signals I can send to my muscles. Unlike peripheral fatigue, which is caused by chemical changes within the muscle fibers themselves, CNS fatigue is about the communication system that controls them. Understanding this distinction sets the stage for exploring the differences between central and muscle fatigue, which we'll cover next. When I talk about fatigue, it's important to distinguish central and peripheral causes. Central fatigue originates in the brain and spinal cord. Neural circuits reduce the number of motor units they recruit or slow the rate at which they fire. In contrast, muscle or peripheral fatigue happens within the muscle itself. It's driven by chemical changes like depletion of energy substrates, accumulation of metabolites, and impaired calcium handling. Central fatigue makes the entire system feel heavy and uncoordinated even if the muscles aren't exhausted, while peripheral fatigue makes the muscles burn and tremble, but the brain is ready to keep going. Knowing the difference helps me tailor recovery strategies. Next, let's look at how the nervous system controls strength in the first place. My ability to generate force starts in the motor cortex of my brain. When I decide to move, the motor cortex sends signals down my spinal cord and into motor neurons that innervate muscle fibers. The number of motor units recruited and the speed at which they fire determine how much force I can produce. With higher neural drive, more motor units are activated, and they fire at faster rates, resulting in greater strength and power. This is why heavy lifts and explosive movements feel so different from light, high-rep training. They demand maximal neural recruitment. Now that we understand neural control of strength, let's explore why heavy lifting is so neurologically demanding. Heavy lifting isn't just tough on your muscles, it's demanding on your nervous system. When I attempt a 1-rep max or a powerful jump, I need to recruit as many motor units as possible and fire them rapidly. Doing this repeatedly drains neurotransmitter stores and taxes neural circuits, especially those involved in motor planning and coordination. That's why a heavy lifting session can leave me feeling mentally as well as physically fatigued. The neuromuscular system needs time to recharge its chemical messengers and restore efficiency. If I push high-intensity efforts without adequate recovery, my nervous system can't keep up. This leads us directly into what happens when CNS fatigue sets in. When central fatigue sets in, the signals from my motor neurons don't fire as quickly or synchronize as effectively. My motor neurons may still send commands, but the firing rates decrease and the timing becomes less precise. Sensory feedback from tired muscles feeds back into the nervous system and tells the motor cortex to throttle down, effectively putting the brakes on my efforts. This protective mechanism prevents me from pushing through harmful levels of stress, but it also means my strength and coordination drop off even if my muscles still have fuel. Understanding this mechanism helps explain why performance drops before the muscles themselves are fully exhausted. Next, we'll see how this translates into observable performance changes. CNS fatigue manifests as diminished performance even when my muscles are physically capable of more. I may notice that the bar feels heavier, my reaction time slow, and my movements become less coordinated. Because the nervous system can't drive the muscles as effectively, power output falls off, and I might miss lifts I normally hit. This decline isn't about muscle strength, it's about the rate and synchronicity of neural impulses. Recognizing these signs allows me to distinguish between simply needing more rest and pushing through muscle fatigue. Once I know what CNS fatigue looks like, I can pay attention to its symptoms, which is the focus of the next slide. CNS fatigue isn't always obvious, but certain signs make it clear. I might feel drained or unmotivated even though I've eaten well and hydrated properly. My performance declines consistently over several sessions rather than just one bad day. I may notice changes in mood, feeling irritable or apathetic, and difficulty concentrating during training or work. These symptoms suggest that my nervous system hasn't recovered fully from previous stress. Paying attention to them helps me adjust my recovery strategies before the fatigue becomes more severe. To understand why these symptoms arise, we need to examine the role of the brain in fatigue, which we'll cover next. Fatigue isn't just about muscles, it's also about chemistry in my brain. During and after intense training, neurotransmitters like serotonin and dopamine fluctuate. Higher serotonin can increase feelings of tiredness, while lower dopamine reduces motivation. At the same time, sensory nerves send feedback from fatigued muscles to the brain, modulating cortical excitability and altering my willingness to recruit motor units. This interplay between neurotransmitter levels and peripheral feedback influences my perception of effort and ability to push through. Recognizing the brain's role helps me appreciate why stimulants can enhance performance temporarily. They tweak these neurotransmitter systems. So let's talk about how stimulants influence the central nervous system. Stimulants act on my brain to temporarily enhance neural output. Caffeine, for instance, blocks adenosine receptors, preventing the accumulation of adenosine that normally signals tiredness. By blocking adenosine, caffeine increases neural firing rates and stimulates the release of catecholamines like dopamine and adrenaline. These chemicals boost alertness, elevate mood, and increase neural drive to muscles. Other stimulants in pre-workouts, such as synephrine or yohimbine, amplify these effects by further stimulating the sympathetic nervous system. Understanding how these compounds work helps me use them strategically, rather than relying on them to mask deeper fatigue. Next, we'll look more closely at caffeine's specific impact on neural drive. Caffeine is well known for boosting performance, and part of its magic lies in enhancing neural drive. When I consume a moderate dose, typically 3 to 6 milligrams per kilogram of body weight, caffeine increases the firing rate of motor neurons and helps recruit more motor units. This makes lifting heavy weights or performing explosive movements feel easier. Interestingly, research shows that when taken in moderate amounts before training, caffeine doesn't exacerbate central fatigue after exercise. It provides a temporary boost without worsening the recovery burden. However, using caffeine responsibly is key. I shouldn't assume that every dip in performance can be fixed with more stimulants. Let's explore the idea of borrowed energy to understand why. Stimulants give the sensation of extra energy, but in reality they're borrowing from your reserve. By blocking fatigue signals and stimulating catecholamine release, I can push harder for a short period. However, the underlying neural circuits are still accumulating stress. Just because I don't feel tired doesn't mean my nervous system isn't taxed. If I repeatedly rely on stimulants to override fatigue, I may be masking the need for recovery and inviting deeper CNS fatigue. It's similar to taking out a loan. I eventually have to pay it back with rest and time off. This leads into the question of how repeated stimulation affects adaptation and recovery. When I use stimulants frequently, my body adapts by blunting cortisol responses to some extent. Cortisol is a stress hormone that helps mobilize energy, and a muted response can make me feel like I'm handling stress better. However, stimulants do not eliminate cortisol production entirely. They can actually keep stress hormones elevated over time. Chronically high levels of cortisol and catecholamines may impair recovery by suppressing immune function and hindering muscle repair. This is why I need to be mindful of how often and how much I use stimulants to avoid creating a hormonal environment that works against my training goals. Now let's address whether pre-workout supplements themselves contribute to fatigue. The question arises whether the pre-workout drink is to blame for feeling worn down. In reality, it's not the supplement directly causing CNS fatigue, it's the training load and recovery imbalance. High stim formulas can encourage me to push harder and lift heavier when my nervous system is already taxed, leading to overreaching. If I don't balance those efforts with sufficient rest, the nervous system will suffer. So while stimulants may contribute indirectly by enabling extra work, CNS fatigue stems mainly from the volume and intensity of training. Understanding this helps me treat pre-workouts as tools rather than causes. To further clarify, let's distinguish between overtraining and CNS fatigue. Overtraining syndrome is a chronic condition that develops over weeks or months of excessive training and insufficient recovery. It involves a broad range of physiological effects: endocrine disruptions, immune suppression, chronic fatigue, and mood disturbances. CNS fatigue, by contrast, is acute and reversible. After a period of heavy lifting or intense cognitive stress, my neural drive may drop temporarily, but it recovers with adequate sleep and a few lighter sessions. Recognizing the difference prevents me from catastrophizing a bad day. CNS fatigue is not a permanent decline, it's a signal to rest. Now we'll look at one of the most important recovery tools: sleep. Sleep is one of the most powerful recovery tools available. Getting less than 7 hours of sleep consistently elevates cortisol levels and reduces my ability to replenish muscle glycogen. Without adequate sleep, my nervous system doesn't reset properly, and my muscles don't repair fully. During deep sleep, growth hormone is released, memories of motor patterns are consolidated, and the brain clears metabolic waste. Prioritizing sleep not only restores neural function but also supports immune health and hormone balance. If I'm serious about training, I need to treat sleep as non-negotiable. The next slide covers practical strategies for recovery beyond sleep. In addition to sleep, there are other strategies I can use to help my nervous system recover. Planning rest days and incorporating deload weeks into my training program allows my neural circuits to recharge and neurotransmitter stores to replenish. Low-intensity sessions, mobility work, or practicing technique are forms of active recovery that keep me moving without overtaxing my CNS. I also pay attention to nutrition, hydration, and stress management outside the gym. By proactively scheduling recovery, I can avoid dips in performance and reduce the likelihood of acute or chronic fatigue. Next, we'll discuss how to manage stimulant intake as part of this recovery plan. Caffeine and other stimulants should be used wisely. For performance enhancement, 3 to 6 milligrams of caffeine per kilogram of body weight is usually sufficient. Exceeding 9 milligrams per kilogram increases the risk of side effects without providing extra benefit. To avoid tolerance and keep my hormonal responses healthy, I cycle off stimulants periodically. This might mean taking a week or two off caffeine every couple of months to reset sensitivity and allow my adrenals to rest. By managing my stimulant use, I get better results when I do take them and reduce the risk of chronically elevated stress hormones. Recognizing when it's time to take a break is key. So let's talk about the signs that I need time off. The body sends clear signals when it's time to step back. Persistent fatigue, even after a good night's sleep, suggests my CNS hasn't recovered. Irritability or lack of motivation are psychological signs that the nervous system is overwhelmed. If my performance has plateaued or even declined for several sessions despite eating and sleeping well, it's time to reevaluate. These indicators are my nervous system's way of asking for a break. Taking a few days off, reducing training volume, or swapping to low-intensity sessions can restore my neural drive. With awareness of these signs, I can balance effort and recovery better. Let's look at how to find that balance. Achieving sustainable progress requires balancing stress and recovery. I align my training intensity with the amount of recovery I can realistically provide. If I'm sleeping less or dealing with life stress, I reduce training load or frequency. I use stimulants moderately and strategically rather than daily. Listening to my muscles for signs of soreness and my mind for signs of fatigue guides me when to push and when to back off. By adjusting load, rest, and stimulants in concert, I maintain progress without burning out. To finish, let's summarize the key lessons and final reminders. CNS fatigue is real, but it isn't permanent. It reduces neural drive, making me feel weak and unfocused, yet it reverses with proper rest. Heavy training and stimulants both place stress on the nervous system. Using them wisely means I need to balance their benefits against their costs. Prioritizing sleep, planning rest days and deloads, managing stress, and using caffeine in moderation are all critical for long-term progress. By listening to my body and respecting my brain, I can continue to get stronger without exhausting my neural engine. Finally, let's remind ourselves why respecting our CNS is crucial for sustainable progress. Your muscles aren't the only part of you that need recovery. Your nervous system does too. Giving my CNS time to rest and reset is essential if I want to keep progressing. Training smart means pushing hard when I'm fresh, resting hard when I'm not, and using tools like stimulants with respect rather than reliance. By respecting my brain and its capacity for work, I set myself up for a future of sustainable gains and fewer setbacks. I encourage you to do the same. Train smart, rest hard, and remember that your nervous system is just as important as your muscles.